That title is not clickbait. It is the single most important development in this case since the body was found. Because this week, an outside organization did something that law enforcement has not done publicly. The United Cajun Navy released a 22-page report compiling all the information it has gathered in the Nolan Wells case: photographs, GPS coordinates, social media statements, and video screenshots from Horn Island on July 4th.
Yeah, so again, just to put it into perspective, it was I'm told it was about 08:45 on 6 July when a park ranger on Horn Island discovered the body, called it in to law enforcement. We had myself and the gentleman who donated his plane that day out of Gulfport. We had been flying for about 2 hours at that point. We were making a track going from Horn Island over to Ship Island down to Chandelier Island, which is south of both of those islands, about another 30 miles. So we were coming back up north towards the northwest tip of Horn Island when we noticed there were boats in the center of the island where there's a lagoon. And then we saw some boats approaching the northwest tip. And then when we got closer, we noticed there were two boats already parked in tandem on the beach. That was strange. It was a Monday morning. It was obvious they weren't fishing. So we descended and to about maybe 450 feet, 500 feet. And we could tell it was law enforcement boats, law enforcement personnel. So we descended maybe another 100 feet or so, circled around. And that's when I saw a law enforcement presence gathering on that northwest point. And then I noticed that there was what appeared to be a body right at the shoreline, laying face down on the sand.
And buried inside that report is a question, a very specific question, one that should keep you up tonight. What happened between the last time Nolan Wells was seen alive and the moment the boat he came on left that island without him at 4:31 p.m.? That gap, that window, that is where this entire case lives or dies. And the story you were told about how and why that boat left, the flip story, the one about the Triton taking on water, about the bilge pump failing, about friends begging Nolan to get on, it just got a lot more complicated.
Take a look at this photo before we go to the Cajun Navy. Look at this. Check out what you're seeing. Look at all the boats surrounding where Nolan was. Leave up the photo out to Caitlin Becker, senior national correspondent, New York Post, star of New York Postcast, their new podcast. Caitlin, what are we seeing?
Any closer to knowing the cause of death. We're not any closer to knowing the circumstances of death. And we're not any closer to establishing anything that looks like civil or criminal liability.
It looks like you're on Horn Island, correct? Are you
Yes,
on
we are
Horn
at Horn
Island?
Island. Yes.
All right. Is the boat sinking or you have it aground?
We were sinking, yes.
Is it aground is the question?
No, we're not aground. We are in
Okay.
17 foot of water. We're in 31 foot of water.
All right. Have to ask. What do you want to do? Do you want to be towed back?
I want to get this boat unsank and towed back, yes.
It has to be in court testimony based on personal knowledge, and any documents, which would include photographs and videos, have to be authenticated. We have to know who took them and when, and with a reasonable degree of certainty, know that they are, in fact, photos and not AI.
This is not just a missing person case that ended in a body recovery. This is the story of a 68-minute hole in a timeline that nobody can fill. And right now, the only people publicly trying to fill it are volunteers.
To you because you're his friend. You were on the island on the 4th. You were on a different boat. Do you recall seeing him at all that day?
Yes, ma'am. I did see him when I was out there on the island.
Can you tell me what you saw? Does anything seem strange to you about the difference that people are saying of how he was separated from the group?
No, ma'am. I don't think that Nolan would say, "Hey, bro, I'm staying with this girl on the island. Y'all go ahead and go back," without even bringing it, like not even asking to get his phone back. You know what I mean? I don't think that any of that.
What makes you so sure about that? Because I mean, obviously you've been with him, you've spent a lot of time with him. Did you know him to be someone to leave his phone or even say, "You guys go without me"?
Never. I've never known Nolan to stay back while his friends leave. He's always been a guy where if he rode with you, he's going to come back with you. That's always how he's been every single time.
You know, this friend of his, Trayston, also told ABC that that video people have been talking about that was said to show some sort of altercation, it did not involve Nolan. He said it was actually him yelling in the video and that you and a family member were holding him back because he'd been in a fight. Is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am. We were calming Trayston down. In that video where he said, give me my effing phone back, it sounds like him. So I'm pretty sure that he was right on that. But
Javon, I'm so sorry to think about what you must be going through and thinking about what's happened to Nolan. I mean, you mentioned a phone. Tashima, a huge question so many people have is why he would have left his cell phone behind. And you say you were the person who actually went and retrieved that phone for the family. How'd you get your hands on the phone? Where was it?
That is correct. Christine called me and told me, hey, where are the boys? Nolan hasn't been heard from since such and such time. Where are your boys? I said, well, Javon is with his girlfriend, and I just spoke with Jalen, and they are headed to downtown, which I was literally getting ready to get in the shower to go downtown as well.
Mm-hmm.
She said, well, Nolan hasn't been. So I instantly called with Christine on the phone, Javon. Javon said, no, he hadn't seen Nolan since early on the island. And he was like, what? Are y'all serious? He was like, yes. And so Christine intervened in the conversation and said, Nolan has not been heard from since he left the island. So Javon was like, well, that's when I seen it. I haven't seen it since then. Again, everybody go their separate ways. So I then hang up from Javon because obviously there's nothing he can say to tell me anything. So then Jalen, I call him. Jalen did not answer the phone. Christine again is on the phone. Jalen did not answer the phone. LeBaron, he didn't answer the phone. I called LeBaron, which is their other friend, LeBaron Broomfield. He answered. He said, Jalen is in the gas station. Hold on. So he said, hey, Jalen, Mom on the phone. So he's like, Jalen, like, what's up, Mom? What's going on? I was like, hey, have y'all heard from Nolan? They said, no, we have not heard from Nolan.
But where was the phone?
So I was like, well, okay. So that's when we started checking the phone. Well, for Christine, it said one place, but for them on Snapchat, it showed another place. So that's the place we went to. And it showed that everybody that was in the house, it was like a lot of people there. Like I'm not familiar with all the kids. I only know like one there, but it showed that the phone was at what a lot of people were at. So that's how we knew where to go to. We went there. They were all there. They were sitting there, lights off, watching TV.
Did they immediately give you the phone? Because knowing that phone was there.
It took about 15. They did. They gave me the phone, but it took about 15 minutes to get the phone. Because I even asked, I'm like, did y'all have to walk back to Horn Island to get the phone?
Let's get into it. Here is the question we are sitting with today, and it is not the one most people are asking. Everyone wants to know what happened to Nolan Wells. That is the emotional question. That is the human question, and it matters. But the investigative question is different. The investigative question is this: can the story that has been told about that boat, the Triton, the one that allegedly took on water, the one that left without Nolan, can that story be verified with electronic data? That is one of the 5 questions the United Cajun Navy says must be answered. Can the 4:31 p.m. Triton departure time be confirmed with electronic data? Think about what that means. We are over a month into this case. Official autopsy results are sealed until the case is presented to a grand jury. The family has hired attorney Ben Crump, whose team is conducting an independent investigation after they say contradictions in the case and a lack of information from investigators concern them. And the one piece of the story that everything else hangs on, the departure of that boat, has not been publicly confirmed by hard data. If you are new to this channel, now is the time to subscribe. We follow cases like this from beginning to end, not with theories, not with speculation, with documents, with sourced reporting, and with the discipline to say what we do not know. Now let's talk about the Cajun Navy report, because the details matter. The United Cajun Navy released a 22-page working analytical report compiling publicly available information, GPS data, photographs, social media posts, and tips submitted by the public. The organization emphasized that the document is a working analytical report and not an official law enforcement finding. That distinction matters. I want to be clear about what this is and what it is not. This report organizes the supplied photographs, videos, annotations, coordinates, and social media statements. It is not a law enforcement finding, and does not determine criminal or civil responsibility. But here is why it landed like a bomb. Nobody asked them to do it, they just decided somebody should. UCN Vice President Brian Trasher said the goal of releasing the report was to provide a digestible document that organized and extrapolated all the information the group has received. And Trasher confirmed the report has already been provided to the Jackson County District Attorney, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, and Wells's parents, Christine and Elmore Wansley. So law enforcement has it, the DA has it, the family has it, and now, so does the public. Let me walk you through what is actually in this document, because most of the coverage has focused on one photograph. And while that photo is important, the real weight of this report is in the questions it raises, not the images it contains. Page 12 of the report shows a photo of 3 boats anchored side by side, identified as boat number 3, the Palm Beach, and the Triton, on the 4th of July. The image drew attention because the Triton was the vessel that later departed the island without Wells. Now here is where it gets layered. According to the report, only the Palm Beach and the Triton have been linked to Wells's group. Witnesses previously said the Triton left the island because it developed problems with a faulty bilge pump, while the Palm Beach reportedly towed the vessel. That is the story that has been told from the beginning. The boat had a mechanical failure. It was taking on water. The friends had to leave, and Nolan chose to stay behind. That is the flip story. But now let's put that story next to the sea tow call, because that audio exists, and it raises questions that do not go away easily. Locke's News obtained audio from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources related to the case. The recording is of a call made from a teen on a boat on Horn Island on July 4th around 4 p.m. to a private towing company, Sea Tow. On that call, the caller says words to the effect of, "Our bilge pump stopped working. We are sinking. Can you please come? It's coming up. We're just sinking. I don't know. We're going down though." The dispatcher asks a simple question. Is everyone on board and in good health? The individual on the boat responded, "Yeah, everyone is on board." Stop right there. Everyone is on board. That is what was said on the call, according to the audio released through MDMR and reported by multiple outlets. Now think about the timeline being told. The friends say they begged Nolan to get on the boat. According to transcripts of accounts shared by Wells' friend Warren Hudson, members of Nolan's group urged him to get on the Triton and leave the island around 4:30 p.m., but he refused. The United Cajun Navy's report says the Triton left the island at 4:31 p.m. The sea tow call was placed around 4 p.m. So the question becomes, if the call was placed around 4 p.m., and on that call someone says everyone is on board, and the friends say they were begging Nolan to get on the boat around 4:30, and the boat left at 4:31. What happened in those 30 minutes? Was Nolan on the boat when that call was made? Was he already off the boat? Was he somewhere on the island? Was he in the water? Notice this. The caller did not say, "We are missing someone." The caller did not say, "One of our friends stayed on the island." The caller said everyone is on board. In one moment on the call, the dispatcher asks how many people are on board, including how many adults, and the caller says there are no children and also no one over the age of 21. This confuses the dispatcher. And when the dispatcher eventually reaches the towboat captain, something else happens. The captain says he is in touch with the boat operator's grandfather, Jerry Adkerson, who recently let authorities search his boat and check the GPS coordinates to aid their investigation. The captain says the grandfather just told him the situation was handled and the people on board do not actually need assistance, despite what they just told the dispatcher. Ultimately, Sea Tow says it did not end up towing the boat. So let me lay this out for you plainly. A group of teenagers calls a tow service in apparent panic. They say their boat is sinking. They say the bilge pump is broken. They are told help is coming. And then, a family member of the boat owner calls the tow captain and says, actually, they do not need help. The situation is handled. And then the boat leaves the island, without Nolan. Does that sound like panic, or does that sound like a plan being executed? I am not answering that question. I am asking you to sit with it, because that is the question the evidence puts in front of us. Now, Here is something else from the Cajun Navy report that has not gotten enough attention. According to TMZ, some people's interpretation of background audio from the emergency call suggests someone might be saying, "Is he dead?" I need to be careful here. To be clear, none of those interpretations have been confirmed. That matters. We are not going to treat unverified audio interpretations as fact on this channel, ever. But we are going to acknowledge they exist, because law enforcement has that audio, and presumably they have the tools to enhance it properly and determine what was said. The family's attorney, Ben Crump, has said experts will be reviewing that call. And that brings us to the enhanced audio, because this is where things shift. Some people online say they hear someone saying Nolan right before someone clearly says, "Oh my God." In other parts of the call, it seems like someone might have said, "Check his chest," and "Wake up." Again, unverified, but the audio exists. Multiple outlets have reported on it. And the Cajun Navy report does not ignore it. What the Cajun Navy report does, and this is what makes it different from social media speculation, is it separates what is documented from what is claimed. The report cites 3 unverified social media statements that potentially indicated Wells's presence or lack thereof. 2 of them seem to be contradictory. One statement, from a person named Matthew Lamp, said he thought Wells was in a group that was almost in a fight around 5 p.m. If that is accurate, Nolan was still on Horn Island at 5 p.m., an hour and a half after the story says the boat left. But here is the friction. Another witness, Caitlin Brochard, snapped a photo of the boats and reported that Nolan was nowhere in sight when her group left the island at 7:30 p.m. So one statement puts him on the island at 5. Another says he was not visible near the boats at 7:30. The Cajun Navy's own report states that until those 5 points are resolved, any narrative that claims certainty about Nolan's movements during the gap exceeds what the supplied evidence can support. That sentence right there, that is why this report matters, because it is saying what no one else has been willing to say publicly. We do not know, and anyone who tells you they do is exceeding the evidence. But then, there is the independent autopsy. And that is where this case takes a turn that most people are still catching up to. The independent autopsy was performed on July 10th, 6 days after Nolan disappeared, 4 days after his body was found. It was conducted by Dr. Roger Mitchell, a board-certified forensic pathologist and the president of the National Medical Association. The autopsy was arranged by the family and Ben Crump and paid for by former NFL player Colin Kaepernick. And here is what Dr. Mitchell found. The cause of death was undetermined. The manner of death was undetermined, both pending further investigation. Now I need you to understand what undetermined means in forensic pathology, because a lot of people heard that word and assumed it meant nothing was found. That is not what it means. Undetermined means the pathologist could not rule in or rule out specific causes with the evidence available. It means the body did not give a clean answer, and in this case there is a very specific reason why. At the time of the report, the forensic pathologist did not know the condition of Nolan Wells before he entered the water. He did not know whether he was conscious or unconscious. He did not know whether he was forced into the water or entered voluntarily. The pathologist said the condition of Nolan Wells before he entered the water would be the crux of the matter. It would be of utmost importance to determining a cause and manner of death. Think about the mechanics of that for a second. The single most important question in this entire case, according to the pathologist who examined the body, is what happened to Nolan before he went into the water. Not what happened in the water, before the water. And that question lives in the same 68-minute gap the Cajun Navy identified. Now here is the finding that got the most attention. The pathologist found red discoloration in the soft tissue in the back of Wells's head, but no underlying skull fractures or lacerations to the skin around that area. Ben Crump stood at the Naki National Convention in Chicago and read directly from the report. He asked, "Why is this dark red here in the back of his head?" He then read the pathologist's conclusion. This pathologist cannot rule out if any intervening non-accidental factors contributed to or caused the death of Nolan Wells. Cannot rule out. That is not an accusation. That is not a finding of foul play. But it is also not a clearance. It is exactly what it says it is. The doctor looked at what he had available and could not eliminate the possibility that something non-accidental happened. Now, to be fair, a former medical examiner, Dr. Michael Baden, said Mitchell was reaching for straws and that the findings are consistent with accounts from local law enforcement that the death was accidental. So you have two forensic voices. One says the evidence is inconclusive and non-accidental factors cannot be ruled out. The other says the findings are consistent with an accident. That is the tension this case is sitting in right now, and neither side has the state autopsy results to settle it. Notice this. The independent autopsy did not include a toxicology report, and the doctor who performed the independent autopsy is working to obtain Wells's throat for examination. It was not present at the time of the second autopsy. The throat was not present, meaning it had already been removed during the first autopsy by the state. Doctors told ABC News that it is not uncommon for pathologists to remove an organ or tissue to examine deeper inside the body. If a second autopsy is requested, there may be a delay in the ability to examine the removed tissue. Factors like this can make secondary autopsies more difficult to conduct than the primary. So the independent pathologist was working with an incomplete body, no toxicology, and no throat, and he still could not rule out non-accidental factors. What would you have concluded if you were in that room? Now, let me bring this back to the Cajun Navy report, because here is where these two threads connect. The Cajun Navy identifies a material gap in the timeline. The independent pathologist says the crux of the entire case is what happened to Nolan before he entered the water. Both of those conclusions point to the same window, the same 68 minutes, the same unanswered period between Nolan being seen alive on that island and that boat leaving without him. And the flip story, the story about the bilge pump, the story about begging him to get on the boat, the story about him choosing to stay behind to talk to a girl, that is the only narrative that currently fills that window. One of the friends said Wells stayed on the island to talk to a girl, but others have cast doubt on that notion. Remember the sea tow call from earlier, the one where the caller said everyone is on board. Here is why it matters now. If everyone was on board at 4 p.m., and the boat did not leave until 4:31, and the friends say they were begging Nolan to get on around 4:30, then either the caller misspoke on a recorded emergency line, or Nolan was on that boat at 4 p.m. and got off before it departed. Either way, the flip story as it has been told does not line up cleanly with the audio evidence that exists. And that is not me speculating. That is the Cajun Navy's own analytical conclusion. Their report says until 5 specific questions are resolved, any definitive narrative exceeds what the evidence can support. Now let me tell you where this case stands legally, because this part matters. The official autopsy in the death of Nolan Wells is complete. Results from the state medical examiner's office have not been made public and will be sent to a grand jury. On July 23rd, the Office of District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath confirmed the autopsy report will be withheld until a grand jury can review it. Every death in the county, except those of natural causes and non-criminal car wrecks, is presented to your grand jury, McElrath said. The DA's office said convening a grand jury does not mean there is any criminality and is standard procedure for most unnatural or suspicious deaths in the county. So to be precise about what is happening, the state autopsy is done. Nobody outside the investigation has seen those results. No charges have been filed, no suspects have been named, no arrests have been made in connection with Nolan's death. As of August 2nd, authorities did not suspect foul play in Wells's death. But the family is not waiting. Wells's family has sent preservation notices to several of the teen's friends who were with him on July 4th, as well as investigative entities connected to the ongoing case. The notices instruct recipients to preserve any materials that could be relevant to future legal claims, including documents, photographs, videos, text messages, emails, and other records. On the same day, family and friends gathered to lay Nolan Wells to rest. The first legal step toward a potential wrongful death lawsuit was quietly unfolding inside the Jackson County Chancery Court. Court records filed that day seek to open Wells' estate and state it consists solely of claims for damages resulting from the circumstances surrounding his death. A letter to Ashley Cole, the mother of Wells' friend Warren Hudson, reads, "You are hereby placed on notice that litigation concerning the death of Nolan Wells is reasonably anticipated. So the legal machinery is turning, on both sides. The Friends fundraising campaign says Warren Hudson, Jack Spatalo, and Morgan Seymour have been wrongly blamed online and seeks money to defend against potential wrongful death litigation while pursuing possible defamation claims. And there is a dark footnote to this case that I want to address directly, because it matters. Federal prosecutors have charged 3 people from across the country with threatening a sitting judge, a witness's family, and 2 county government offices connected to the case. The most striking detail in every charging document is the same. None of the defendants appear to know Wells, his family, or anyone in his social circle. Their outrage came from social media. One of the defendants, Edward James Porter, is accused of making multiple threats to 2 witnesses on July 31st. According to a probable cause affidavit, Porter made multiple calls threatening to kill them and their families. That is not justice. That is not advocacy. That is obstruction. Scholars of internet vigilantism have documented this outcome as predictable. Online harassment campaigns in contested criminal cases routinely obstruct the investigations they claim to demand, by driving away the witnesses and officials whose cooperation is required to produce any result at all. If you want justice for Nolan Wells, threatening witnesses is the single fastest way to make sure his family never gets it. Now, let me tell you what this family actually wants, because it is not a predetermined verdict. It is not a social media campaign. It is something much simpler and much harder to deliver. Christine told Good Morning America, "At the end of the day, I would hope any parent would fight for their kids to find out if anything happened, what did happen. We just want honesty and transparency. We want a thorough investigation. We want that same respect that would be given to anybody else." In a recent social media video, Wells's mother said, "I am asking for answers. That is it. That is all. That is it. That is all." A mother buried her 18-year-old son, an 18-year-old wide receiver, an 18-year-old who went to a 4th of July party with his friends and never came home, and all she is asking for is answers. At the funeral, she said, "Share his stories, and never stop saying his name." Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He was a football player. He was a son. He was somebody's friend. He was somebody's teammate. He was somebody who was supposed to have decades ahead of him. And right now, the question his family is sitting with, the question the Cajun Navy report raises, the question the independent autopsy could not answer, the question the state autopsy has not publicly answered, is the same question from the very beginning. What happened to Nolan Wells in those 68 minutes on Horn Island? The flip story says the boat was sinking. The sea tow audio says everyone was on board. The friends say they begged him to stay. The pathologist says the crux of everything is what happened before the water. And no one has connected those dots. Not publicly, not yet. We will keep following this case until there are real answers, not theories, not speculation, answers. The state autopsy is done. A grand jury is coming. Preservation notices have been sent. And a 22-page report from a volunteer organization is sitting on the district attorney's desk right now asking 5 questions that still do not have answers. If this case stays with you, subscribe so you do not miss the next update. We cover cases like this with documents, not drama. With sources, not theories. Now that you have heard the sea tow audio, the Cajun Navy timeline, and the independent autopsy findings, what stands out to you most? Drop it in the comments, because this conversation is far from over, and Nolan's family is still waiting.